how did you first come into contact with the Bangladeshi community?
Through my work as a teacher in what was then horribly called the Immigrant Language Unit, which was a classroom at the end of a corridor in a primary school. The children came for half a day. When I joined, there was one teacher working that half day with foreign arrivals, Hong Kong Chinese and some from Bangladesh, and very, very occasionally Pakistan.
Right.
We were moved around quite a lot, but to similar circumstances, vacant classrooms in schools with diminishing pupil numbers.
Right. And who did you meet from the community? And can you describe some of your relationships with the people?
Right. Overwhelmingly, the first pupils I had were teenage boys who were being brought over before the immigration laws were changed to work in catering, with the intention, I suppose, of becoming heads of households.
Right.
But initially they came. Many of them had very, very little schooling in Bangladesh, and if they'd had schooling at all, it had finished when they were 10 or 11.
Right.
So when they came at 13, 14, 15, they were quite surprised to have to go back into school. Because our law was obviously different. They didn't resent it at all, but they were a little bit taken aback. Some of them really appreciated it, and they thought it gave them an opportunity to finish something they'd begun in Bangladesh.
Mm-hmm.
And they, by and large, learned the language quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And contrary to popular opinion, that's not because they were young.
Mm-hmm.
It was because they were very open.
Mm-hmm.
And I had come from a comprehensive school with white children who were quite disaffected, some of them, and consequently naughty, not interested in school. And it was really lovely for me to come to a group of children who were polite,
mm-hmm.
respectful, and wanting to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, they learned the language quite quickly.
Right.
It wasn't an ideal situation, and it was something that I fought against over time, that they were isolated. They came to a unit,
mm-hmm.
And so they only spoke with me,
mm-hmm.
whereas if they'd been in their own school,
mm-hmm.
they would have been interacting with other children, and they would have learned the language even
mm-hmm.
quicker.
Yeah.
So that was something I campaigned about for a long time.
Right.
And eventually the unit was disbanded, and we began to be peripatetic and go into the schools. So the children arrived, enrolled in their local school, and we went out to teach them there. When was it disbanded? Probably in the early 90s.
Are there any particular incidents that you remember? Any?
There were many happy times. As I say, the children were lovely. And at times, like Eid, we virtually had the day off because all the children stayed away. So we took the opportunity to visit homes,
right.
and we were always welcomed. And I've never eaten so many curries in my life, because every time we went to a house we had to share the food. And that was really lovely. And my sister worked in the Gulf for 10 years, her and her husband, and they were in Saudi Arabia. And she brought me back some bottles of Zamzam water. And I remember taking a little bottle to a house, and they were. You'd think I brought them a pot of gold. They were so overwhelmed, and it was really lovely. I really, really appreciated that. Other times, the children would come to school in their traditional dress. At the time of Eid, they would show us their new clothes, and the girls would put their saris on. One of the pictures I might have is me trying on a sari, and you know, so yeah, they were very happy times. I remember children being successful in English exams. You know, that was really an achievement,
Right.
and they were very happy with that. There were some unpleasant times, obviously. These schools that we were had a classroom in, there was quite a lot of racism to be dealt with, not necessarily from the other children, but from staff. There was a resentment.
Right.
And when we started to go into schools on a peripatetic basis, it was very much, well, why are these children getting all this attention? I've got children who need extra and they're not getting attention. So there was a tension there sometimes.
Right. Could you tell me a bit more about the racism element, where you think it stemmed from, and
the racism between the indigenous children and the Bangladeshi children was largely name calling, and that was obviously learnt from parents, from white parents. There was a couple of serious incidents involving knives, and I'm afraid the head teacher of Thornhill at the time took the view that anything that happened outside the school was none of his business, and didn't do anything, in my opinion, to foster good integration. Because if he'd done that in the school, the incidents outside the school wouldn't have occurred. Mm-hmm. So there was a bit of gang warfare, if you like. Mm-hmm. The little children used to tell me about things that happened after dark. So they would be sitting watching television, and people would flap the letterbox and shout things through, or they would throw stones at the window. Sometimes they were woken up in the night through that. So that was distressing for them. Right.
Yeah. How easy was it to interact with the community? Did you find there were cultural differences that you had to work to overcome?
Well, I was a woman, right. So there was always a difficulty with dads, some of whom were very respectful because of my profession, but others who were not because I was a woman. Mm-hmm. So there was sometimes some difficulty there. Right. They very much expected me to do as I was told. And I had to, say, well, professionally, that's not on, and this is what's going to happen. Yeah. There was a little bit of that. The women, obviously, I got on well with, and we managed to persuade the women to come to classes. So before I left, we had set up a very successful class for the women. So that was very nice. Great. And of course, we shared recipes. Right. And I remember one girl who said, I'm not supposed to tell you this, in case you set up a curry shop, in case you steal these recipes. And I said, no, there's no chance of that. That's quite all right. Don't tell her how to do the rice.
How long did the women's class last for?
That was just before I retired, right. And we had about 3 years of it.
Okay.
A rolling programme of learning English through childcare and parenting, right. And learning what the children learn so that they could be more helpful when children brought work home. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of these women were still being brought over from Bangladesh to be married. Right. I should say the boys went over to Bangladesh and came back with a bride. Yeah. So they were not used to English schooling. Right. And they didn't know what the children were expected to do.
Right. Well, what do you think the relationship was between the Bangladeshi community and the wider population of Sunderland?
Unfortunately, I only heard the bad things. I'm aware that the Bangladeshi community, certainly in the 80s and 90s, was very much centred here in Hendon. Gradually, they began to move out, particularly the more prosperous and aspirational families moved out. But it did seem to be a little enclave.
Right.
I think when this centre was built, I came across people who thought they had somehow got the money from some pot that should have been used on the white community. So the same idea as the teachers in schools: why are these children getting all this attention? Why should the Bangladeshi community have a building of its own? So that was problematic, I think. But by and large, I don't think there has been a great deal of trouble.
Right.
I know that the far-right groups have been successful to a degree in Sunderland. And I was very worried, I forget how long ago it is now, 1994, 5. The whole of the council was up for re-election, so instead of one councillor per ward every 3 years, all 3 councillors were up. And in every ward there was a far-right presence standing. And at that time we were aware of an increase in racist incidents in schools. So clearly what was the conversation at home was being transferred into school because of the higher profile of the far-right at that time.
What year was that, sorry?
That was the mid-90s. I can't remember exactly, but you could find that out from the Civic Centre.
Do you think outside of the racist element, do you think the Bangladeshi community faced other challenges?
Yes, obviously they faced language difficulties, cultural difficulties, and to a certain degree, I think they were very brave to move out of Hendon.
Right.
You know, so the aspirational parents, when they could afford it, who moved out, and we began to see moving from Hudson Road School to Barnes, to other schools. I'm trying desperately to think now. Quarry View, Abu mentioned. So as they spread out, I'm sure that they, would find difficulty in, because when your neighbour's the same as you, that's fine. When you're different from the rest of the street, that makes it more difficult.
Yeah.
By and large, I think they still kept very much to themselves, but some of them got on really well with their neighbours.
Right. What do you think the Bangladeshi communities contributed to Sunderland?
Cultural aspects, certainly cuisine, and it's rumoured that chicken tikka masala is now the national dish of England. So they've contributed that. And I think a general awareness of multiculturalism that in the northeast here we have no awareness of, or very little awareness of. When you go to London and a third of the population is from one group or another, here it's something like 5%.
Yeah.
And I, in my professional capacity, tried to introduce into schools a programme of English language learning.
Right.
But it did involve quite a lot of change, and I could see teachers thinking, well, I've only got one. Why should I do all this when I've only got one child in the classroom? Failing to recognise that it would benefit all the other children who were linguistically deprived because they were from disadvantaged backgrounds. But that sort of programme would go down well in London or in Bradford or Leicester, where the population is 80-90% non-English speakers.
Do you think life's improved for the Bangladeshi community since they first arrived here?
It's hard to say from the outside. They seem to have become more prosperous. They seem to have settled in well. They seem to benefit from education, health, that kind of thing. I don't know on a day-to-day basis whether they feel they've improved. I worry greatly about the current Islamophobia and how they are coping with that. That is a worry, and I can see, and I have heard, it's been said to me that they seem to be pulling up the drawbridge a bit.
Who do you mean by they?
The Bangladeshis.
The Bangladeshi community.
Well, Muslims.
Yeah.
And it's certainly happening in South Shields as well.
Right.
Because I'm a governor of a school with the Bangladeshis.
Right.
And so when you're under attack, I think the natural thing to do is get the wagons in a circle.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that may be happening to a certain extent, and it's very worrying.
Right.
Because after a generation of integration, however slowly and however little, it is a progressive thing to look to be better integrated. And now I feel that they might be drawing back and becoming girls who would never have put on a what do you call the black thing? Hijab. Now do it.
Right.
Girls who wouldn't worry too much about their hair now be sure to have a scarf on. You know, little things like that. But it does exacerbate the situation rather than. But it's understandable.
Yeah. Well, when would you say that started becoming a problem? Do you think things were made worse after 9/11 and events like that?
I think it's been more recent than that.
More recent?
Yes. Yes, I think it's been in the last 5 or 6 years.
Right. How do you think things could improve for the community?
I think the Indigenous community must be more proactive in setting up projects and opportunities for integration.
Yeah.
And in the schools as well, you know, get them while they're young.